Mom and Dad Have a Great Big Fight is a really interesting episode of Arthur, with several really important messages that different people can benefit from depending from where you're coming from. This is the first segment in the 14th episode of the third season, and Arthur and DW's parents are, I wouldn't say they were having an argument as such, but they were bickering, they were getting on each other because they're under a lot of pressure, because Arthur's father kind of forgot that they had friends coming over for dinner. They're trying to put together this dinner last minute. The kitchen is in absolute chaos, and then something happens and they begin to kind of escalate this fight. Interestingly, this is kind of told through the perspective of Nadine, which is very interesting. That really didn't need to be the case, but I didn't mind it, didn't love it, but thought it was an odd choice. But then DW goes to Arthur and says our parents are fighting. And Arthur doesn't believe this at first because it's so out of character for them to fight, which that's true. I can't think of an episode before this where they've had such kind of animosity between them. And Arthur goes to talk to them and they both begin to panic and they begin to imagine what life would be like if their parents split up. And I imagine this is something a lot of children relate to. I came from a broken home. My parents fought constantly, eventually divorced. So I can understand that kind of fear and worrying what life will be like, first of all, if their parents are separated, but also if they keep arguing. But they learn some important things, and there are several messages in here. The first is that parents can argue and do argue, and I think that's the most important lesson, that if you're seeing your parents arguing, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to split up. Parents, like children, can get at each other's nerves sometimes, and that's life. And it's not always a bad thing. Parents are mature enough to have their fight, get over it, and move on with life. And it's not always serious. It also shows that both parents have a really important role in the children's lives, because when they're imagining living with just this parent or that parent, there is a gap. Because of certain things that each parent brought to the family, there are certain things that aren't being fulfilled. That's not to say that one parent can't do everything, but certainly for Arthur and DW, their parents both bring different things to the table. It's also an important message for any parents watching this with children, that if you are fighting with your spouse or your partner, remember your children are going to be watching this and quite frankly panicking about it. And it's important to be mindful, not that you should not let your children know that you fight, because I think it's important for children to learn that adults can also bicker like children do, but to make them aware that if you are fighting, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to have their whole lives ripped from underneath them. So there are so many important messages in this depending on which side you're on or where you're coming from. I think it's very well done. The whole involvement of Nadine I thought was a bit peculiar, but not so much that it didn't work or anything. Certainly it's a really important episode. I think Mom and Dad Have a Great Big Fight is one that I think a lot of people will be able to relate to in one way or another, and I think it's handled the subject matter pretty well.